Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a contributor for singletracks.com, and I had the absolute pleasure of testing and reviewing the Yeti 160E. This is Yeti's first e-bike, and it's also a full-size e-bike built for enduro racing specifically, though it is fun for us normal folks, so don't worry if you're not planning on racing it, you're still going to have a great time. I live in Golden, Colorado, which coincidentally is where Yeti is headquartered. Most of my test rides were here on local trail networks and also up in the mountains of Colorado. So everything is extremely loose and dusty. There's nothing tacky about the trails here. Most of my personal riding was trying to find the most chunky, technical terrain that I could, both uphill and downhill. So you may be wondering what took Yeti so long to create an e-bike. As you've noticed, many other companies are ahead of the game, or at least ahead of Yeti, in terms of having e-bikes available. This bike is specifically created for racing, so racing enduro. That's why the suspension is so large, so 160 in the rear, 170 in the front. It's a full-size e-bike. It also took Yeti a lot of time to consider the laws of physics, really, and how the weight of an e-bike would function with a motor and suspension and still slay the trails. So part of the time it took Yeti to create this was they had to come up with a completely new suspension design. You've heard of Sixfinity, of course, and that is typically located right down here where the motor is on this e-bike. So Yeti had to design the Sixfinity suspension, which is this suspension, around the unique position of the motor and also taking into consideration the weight and the desired performance of the bike. Sixfinity uses a 6-bar linkage design with a lower link that switches directions as the suspension progresses through its travel. The switch link initially rotates upward, providing a wide and flat band of anti-squat for smooth and supported pedaling. And as soon as the suspension reaches its inflection point, it switches directions and rotates downward until bottom out, causing the anti-squat to drop off progressively. This allows the suspension to be active and to move more freely when deeper in the travel and when pedaling is not a priority. Compared to a traditional bike, e-bikes use a greater range of gears when climbing, and the Sixfinity suspension allows for consistency and predictability regardless of gear choice. The neat thing about the Yeti 160E is the flip chip adjustable leverage rate, which allows for 10% change to the rate of progressivity, while geometry, anti-squat, and anti-rise remain consistent. The leverage rate settings can be modified by selecting one of 3 discs placed directly into the frame below the suspension. The stock position is at 30%, providing a nice balanced ride. However, the disc can be switched to 25% for a firmer, more efficient ride, or 35% for a plush feel with more pop. All right, so let's talk the Yeti 160E basics. So what did the model that I rode have on it? So I rode the T1 Turk Series, which is the nicer of the two models. The Turk Series comes with a Turk Series full carbon frame, as does the C1 model. Of course, Turk refers to the type of carbon and not the color, although it is turquoise. Comes with 29-inch wheels. The rear suspension is 160, the front is 170. Of course, it comes with the Sixfinity suspension platform. The seat tube angle is 78 degrees. The head tube angle is 64.5 degrees. The chainstay length is 446 millimeters. There is an uninterrupted seat tube. All cables are internally routed with secure ports. If you choose to run a wireless setup, the ports can also be plugged. A 630-watt Shimano battery that is semi-integrated, so you can use a 4mm Allen key to remove the battery from the bike and charge it separately. It comes with this Shimano Steps EP8 motor, Shimano XT drivetrain with XTR cranks, an e-tuned Fox 38 factory Grip 2 fork, Yeti's in-house tuned Fox Factory Float X2 shock, the proprietary Yeti EMTB specific carbon handlebar, which also has the display unit mounted to it, RockShox Reverb AXS dropper, SRAM code RSC brakes, a DT Swiss EX 1700 wheel set, a custom 1-up chain guide, SRAM universal derailleur hanger. The sizes range from small to extra large. The weight without pedals is 50 pounds, and generally speaking, it's awesome. So you turn the bike on by pressing this little button right here on the down tube. Most e-bikes that I've seen actually have their digital display built into the down tube. Yeti's is on its proprietary thermoplastic handlebar, and it's located kind of right in your field of vision. So it is attached to the handlebars. I found this to be less optimal than I would have wanted. I understand the use, so if you are actually racing this bike in any capacity, the display does show you your speed and your mode and your battery life. So if you need to access that information quickly while you're riding, you can see it all right there. None of those things are important for me to see all the time, and I found the display to be a little bit visually annoying, so I kept looking at it even though I didn't need to look at it. So I'd much prefer if it were in the down tube. However, it is front and center, so something to think about. Maybe you'll like that feature. One thing Yeti added to the bike was the Shimano EP8 motor. It's supposedly more powerful than the last version, which I can't attest to because I hadn't ridden the last one. However, it engages immediately when you provide pressure on the pedals, and it disengages immediately when you remove your foot from the pedals. Shimano shaved about 5 millimeters off the height of the motor, so it is a little bit higher of a bottom bracket, which is nice. I did find that when I was going through rock gardens and over things that I can typically clear with a normal bike, the weight and the bottom bracket height of this got stuck on a few things, and perhaps that's just my inability to bunny hop 50 pounds. But either way, it's nice to have a little bit more clearance there. The other thing about the EP8 motor that was a little bit annoying was the sound. I don't know if it's the pitch or the volume or what, but there is some sort of high-pitched sound that comes from this motor that I just don't like audibly. It might not bother some, but to me it was very annoying. You'll hear the motor knocking around a little bit, and that's disconcerting, but it didn't seem to affect the performance in any way, so it's just an audible thing. Overall, I really love this bike descending. You can't go wrong with 160, 170, right? That's just a shred sled. Secondly, the Sixfinity anti-rise properties really help the suspension feel active and consistent no matter what I was doing. So if I hit a bunch of brake bumps, it remained consistent throughout all of that chunder, which is an awesome feature of this bike. The one thing that I would note is that you don't get any pedal assist when you're going downhill, obviously, and now you have a 50-pound bike to handle. If you're thinking of purchasing this bike just to ride and not to race, it's worth considering that the bike itself weighs 50 pounds. For me, that's quite a bit. I weigh 115 pounds, so 50 pounds is just under half my body weight. It was in some instances where I was hitting lots of rocks and drops right in a row. It was very difficult to maneuver and handle the weight. That aside, the traction was excellent. It's very precise in corners, and really you just have to figure out how to maneuver the weight, which is a learning curve. Jumping on the 160E is relatively straightforward. The only thing I would say is because of the weight, there's a little bit of lag time going off the jumps, and it feels a little slower in the air, although I don't think that's true. I think holistically it's faster. So if you're at a bike park, for instance, you'll probably feel the weight a lot more. If you're on trail jumping, you already have the momentum of the descent, so it's relatively easy. If anything, you would maybe brake check your jump a little bit because of the added speed due to the weight. Going off drops was similarly easy. I had no problem sending it off, things that I actually didn't even look at. I knew that the suspension would soak it right up, and it certainly did. As soon as I landed, the traction was there. It was easy to make cornering maneuvers. Everything about the descending was a lot of fun. So climbing on the 160E, obviously it's easier because you have a motor. So that's one huge difference. It's definitely easier going up smoother, sustained climbs with small pebbles and small obstacles. However, I would say on a number of those climbs, I never really use boost mode and I rarely use trail mode just because it provides so much additional torque that if your body isn't actually seated on the seat or if you're not balanced over the bike, it tends to spin the rear tire a little bit, so you lose traction in the back. That being said, the Sixfinity suspension provides a nice consistent feel and stays active as long as your pedals are turning, so that actually does help keep it pretty grounded. Though some pedaling efficiency is lost, there's a little bit of bob from here to there. That's masked by the power of the motor, so if you flipped it up to trail, you wouldn't even notice the bobbing because you'd be going so fast uphill. For technical climbs or technical sections of trail where it's not just little tiny rocks, maybe something big like the one behind us, in addition to many of those piling up on one another, I found the Yeti 160E to be a little challenging in that department, and there's a few reasons why. The weight of the bike is 50 pounds. I weigh 115 pounds. It's extremely difficult for me to wheel lift a 50-pound bike. Sometimes I utilize the ratchet pedal to help lift my wheel, but if you remember, the motor engages immediately upon pressure on the pedals. So if you're doing a ratchet, you get all the power all at once and you can't modulate it. One reason to stay in eco mode is for that reason specifically. So if I were in boost mode coming up to some steep section with rocky technical terrain, if I did all my power all at once, I actually tend to loop out backwards, which happened only a few times. So keeping it down in the lower modes to keep the torque more consistent and the power that you get a little more consistent is much more useful for technical features. I don't think I ever use boost mode for those, and I rarely use trail. For more reviews like this one, make sure you visit our YouTube channel, subscribe, like, all the things, and visit singletracks.com daily for reviews, trail progressions, videos like this one, and just generally a good time.